Good morning, Steve. How you doing?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to have you on the show. You and I were just rallying back and forth, and I can tell this is going to be a fun one. We might have to hit explicit because I think you and I both have the same kind of vocabulary.
Yes, we do, for sure.
So you and I got introduced through a mutual friend, and you had sold to one of the businesses here in town or in Minnesota. And for the chart, and for the for the listeners who are not familiar with your story, and I'm fairly fresh into understanding it too. How did you become an entrepreneur? Was it accidental? You said that before we hit record that you were working with your dad. So how did it all come to be?
Well, an entrepreneur, I started when I was a kid, and I grew up in it, so there was no way around it. It was one of the only things that I knew how to do. My father, growing up, had his own business that we weren't involved with until we were older because, as you know, growing up in a family business, there's only one way to come up, and it started the rock bottom. So we had to cut lawn outside for 2 years before we even came into the office. So before that, at 12 years old, I started cleaning cars. I'm a car buff. And father said, well, if you're going to be cleaning cars, you might as well do it for money. And he sat me down and taught me, a general budget at 12 years old and how to maintain finances and things like that. So I started then, and by the time I was 18 and in college, I had 2 locations, one in Massachusetts, one in Maine, and I had a kid running it, a guy run on both locations, and I went back and forth, and that's how I started out to be an entrepreneur.
That's awesome. So when did you, going from there, when and how did the journey progress to working with your dad? What was that? What was his family business?
The family business was kind of in the business that Chart is in, but on the distributor side. So he was a industrial gas and welding supply distributor with 5 locations throughout central Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And he owned it. He bought it from his dad at age 26 in 1969. Wow. And then he had it, and all the way up until 1990, he sold off to a major company called Airgas.
So were you working in the business when did you work for him at all during that stint?
Well, it was funny because, I always, as a kid, my 2 older brothers, I'm the youngest of 3 boys, and they started before I did. And I always said, we laugh about it to this day. I always said I didn't want to go to work for him. But I ended up going to work for him when I was in school, and I got engaged and my life turned serious. And so I started off learning how to pump liquid cylinders and how to do all the stuff in the shop. And then my first journey into the office was being a repo manager. So I literally went on the road in a pickup truck with my dog and a sidearm and repoed liquid cylinders and welding machines from some really obscure, far out places in the woods of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. And it was pretty scary. But, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, I literally just walked into people's houses, broke glass, opened doors, and took our welders back. It was hilarious. And that was my only thing I did with them. And, cops called, and when you're on people's locations and things like that. So it was an amazing experience. But from there, I kind of went into the collections and AR and all that stuff. So
that makes sense.
That's when he sold.
You doing collections with a sawed-off shotgun?
Yeah, it was great, man. It was a lot of fun, and I had a really cool female American Eskimo dog, which is, I don't know if you know, but it's a white fluffy dog, and so she was small, and so we got to this far out place in New Hampshire, and I get out of the truck and a Rottweiler was coming at me. I just let her out. She'd play with him. I'd go steal my stuff, and I'd get back in the truck and call the dog. It was some good stories, man.
That's amazing. Like I started off doing meter reads, so I would call doing collections, but I'd have to ask someone for their copy or meter read so I could bill them. Very, very different. There was no shotguns and no dogs involved.
Well, it's funny. I remember I went into this one place and I remember I knocked on the woman's door and she said, my husband's not here. And so I wasn't giving her a hard time, but I was serious. I'm like, well, we're here. You're back like 6 months of payment. So I need to take that information. So they had this garage, kind of like a breezeway connected, and then a house. So you could see way out to the back. And here comes this truck, Ryan, about 100 miles an hour. And it's the husband. He's coming to just beat the crap out of me. So it went from that and him holding me by my neck to them serving me breakfast and coffee. And 5 minutes later, because I just sweet talked him. So it was a fun time. And I did that for a year and a half.
Oh my gosh. So because it sounds like it was all kind of related to the same business that you guys, that you've stayed in. So
for a bit. I took a break and went out, and I actually, when I graduated college, which is right around the time I was doing that work, it was in 1990, actually, is the exact year. I actually moved to the East Coast of Florida and got a job right out of college as a buyer and general manager for the largest cheese importer in the country that was a subsidiary of Kraft General Foods in Philip Morris, USA. So I did that for 4 years. So that was a pretty cool part of my life. It was neat to grow up in an entrepreneur family and then go to a big company like that and look at the other side and see corporate America and how it acts and how it responds. But yet I took all my, I guess, I don't want to say entrepreneur skills, but I took all those entrepreneur ethics with me growing up in a small business where no matter what you could do, you had to do everything. And my father, I never forget these words. He offered me the best advice walking out of the house. He said, listen, you're going to work from someone else for the first time in your life. You do yourself one favor. I said, what's that? He says, go to work every day like you own the place. And I don't care what type of situation it is, make sure you act like it's your dollar. And you'll never go wrong. And I did that. And for every action I did, every decision I made, I just thought it was my business. And it was successful. And it was really neat to do that. And then I moved back from Florida, got a divorce. Hard time in my life, got a divorce, came back, and started, I was a finance manager for Chrysler Credit. Go figure.
No kidding.
And I'm a car buff too, so that was kind of fun. So I did that for about a year and a half when the phone call came. It was my father, and he said, hey, remember Skaff Cryogenics? And I'm like, yeah, we actually used to lease our cryogenic tanks off of them at my dad's business. He said, well, we have an opportunity here. Are you bored? I'm like, well, kind of. He goes, well, come, why don't you meet me for dinner and we'll talk about it. So he was called by the owner's wife of Skaff Cryogenics, and the owner had passed away. My father knew him. He's, somewhat friends with them. And she was, to no fault of her own, the business was going south really quick. And it was kind of a weird situation. Her husband's old partner, was a shop guy. She was the bookkeeper, and neither one of them knew which way to go. So they called my father in to be a consultant. And then he called me to be a consultant. And we went in there, long story short, after about a year and a half, we turned that business around. We doubled their highest year ever in a year and a half. And I looked at my dad and I said, hey, we either buy this thing or I'm leaving, because I just can't work for pennies every single day and work 7 days a week. So we went to her and offered her to buy the business. She lost her mind and had a meltdown. And then about a week later came back to us and said, okay. And then the story goes from there. And we ended up purchasing the business in 1997.
So I want to peel the onion back on a couple of these parts, because one is like, where in that journey was it? We're at the cheese importer that your dad sold, and then what did he learn, or what were some of the big takeaways from that? And then what were some of the ways that maybe that kind of rolls right into, Steve, like how you guys purchased it? Like, was there any kind of like typical way of valuations, or how, like, the deal structure that you and your dad learned from him selling? Or like, how did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, he sold in 1990, and this was 90. He started as a consultant in end of like mid 94, and so he had 4 years of not doing much, but doing some real estate investments. So he knew that structure. I mean, he sold his business. It was a big business. 75 employees, 5 locations, the whole bit, and it sounds like what you were kind of familiar with. And so when it come time to buy the business from her, I mean, their biggest year was $300,000 in sales with 5 employees. So it was a tiny business, and they were about a week away from bankruptcy when we first went in there. So a year and a half later, we bumped it. We increased sales to about 600,000, a little bit over. And so the valuation was simple. It was not a dramatic thing like selling to a major corporation like he did earlier by himself. And, Airgas is the biggest gas company in the country. And if I dare say, probably the world at this point. But, it wasn't structured like that. The fight with corporate America, it was a sat down with the owner and said, listen, this is the biggest year you had in sales. This is where we are. And we paid her fair market value. We ended up giving her a good offer, and she took it. And for her, it was perfect timing to get out of the business, and she had no desire to be there. And so it wasn't complicated. It was probably the easiest thing in the world to say, hey, listen, this is what we think the business is worth. This is what, we're doing in sales. This is what your debt is. And what do you think? It was that simple, Ryan. And I tell you, it's compared to what we just went through, 2.5 years ago, it's just over 2 years ago.
To a public company.
Totally different.
Yeah. This is the back of the napkin. Let's wash it down a little, the agreement with the handshake.
That's pretty much what it was. I mean, we literally sat in the conference room in our old building, and that's pretty much what it was. We wrote a number on a piece of paper and showed her financials, and literally back then we didn't have computers, man. We didn't have the internet. So this is all on paper, so we literally just handed it to her, and she said fine, and we paid her cash right away, and we went on from there. So
then,
day one, my dad looks at.
I was just say I want to go back into the day one, but I'm curious on like, and maybe you were about to explain this, is like, so you and your dad are now partners, right? So you've watched him and you've worked for him in the past. Now you guys are partners. How, one of the biggest challenges I see people is like distinguishing the difference in the roles between ownership and roles and responsibility, and how you get paid on roles and responsibility versus ownership. Like what was the agreement that you guys had going into this?
Oh, it's funny. That's what I was, and I don't know if it was, I knew you were going to ask that question, but day one, he looks at me, Ryan, he says, all right, listen, I have no desire in running this business. We'll do it together for a little bit, but I want to start a leasing business. And I think there's a big future in leasing. And this was end of 96, beginning of 97. So basically what he was doing was the same thing I did in the car business when leasing and setting up finances for customers who couldn't afford to bring up the capital right away. So he goes, I want to do that. I have no desire to have people problems. I have no desire to wear my priest hat, my teacher hat, and all the different hats you have to do as an owner with all the employee problems that you do. You're going to deal with that. So he says, you run Skaff Cryogenics. I'm going to start a leasing company. Back then, we called it BP Tanks. My father's initials is Bob Prefontaine. So he called it BP Tanks, and we separated the 50-50. So that lasted for a little while and was starting to drain money out of the business. So we actually started a sister company in 98 called CryoLease. And it was set up just for leasing tanks to customers who didn't have the capital, startup distributors, things that, end users.
Yeah. That's awesome, because that's
and so it really grew. So it really grew like crazy. So pretty much the same type of thing you were in the copying business, I would imagine, in that type of leasing. And then we get into building portable trailers for customers that would be short-term leases that are literally like a machine to print money. And, it was a lot of fun. So I did the repair business. He did the leasing company, and both businesses flourished like crazy. Of course, I always picked his brain. He always was involved. But for the most part, we ran separate businesses. And then we got on in years, probably around 2002 and 3, we ended up growing out of that building and moving to a bigger building, a huge acreage, and 3 times the size of the building. So we really separated at that point. We both businesses just went nuts. It was fantastic. So, never one argument in 24 and a half years with them either. That's
no
the most
kidding.
Coolest part about the whole experience. Not even one. I mean, not even a disagreement. We're both Virgos. We're both anal. We both have the same mindset, and literally not one argument. Probably the best man to ever own a business with.
Why? Why do you think? What is that? What do you attribute that to?
He was already through it. He already been through the nightmares of owning the business when he was younger. And this is a man that's 50 years old. I'm, at that time I was 25, 26. And so, he just mentored and was very calming. Nothing riled him up. We had this customer next door that we actually sold one of the buildings that the old owner used to have to him. So then we had to lease back some paint space and a blast room. And he would come over and he would scream at my dad up and down, yell at him like you wouldn't believe it. I'm in the next office getting like really angry. I'm going to go in and kill this guy, right? But I'd go in, my father has a smile on his face, and the guy would let the guy get all worked up and then tell him what we're going to do, and always got his way. He was the most calming influence that I've ever seen in a guy, and he's still like that to this day at 80 years old.
So was it because he had already been I don't know if he was financially free and he was doing it for the love of the game at this point and just didn't need to care, or was it just his that's his temperament. That's unbelievable, his temperament. And I think back in the day when he had his earlier business, he was beat up by the banks in a really bad way. He had a nice line of credit with this bank and was always paying on time. And then out of the blue, he was talking, $3-4 million line of credit. And out of the blue, they called a loan. Oh my God.
And
been there.
No reason to do it, no background to do it whatsoever. And it was funny because it was at the time that he was trying to sell anyways, and they did not know that. So he said, fine, closed on the business, walked into the bank, handed him a check, and told them all, you know what? That's not like my father either.
That sounds very similar to my story. Oh, by the way, when we got like our story was very similar to that, Steve. And then the bank had the nerve to ask us to keep the money there.
They did the same thing, and I'll never forget it. The look on his face. I learned so much from that, being his son and not even being with them. I learned so much from that just by hearing him talk and hearing him describe the situation. So you get beat up enough like that. And, I'm sure, we all get our bumps and bruises owning a business, for sure. And getting beat up like that, doing it all over again with a small business, when we sat down, he said, listen, I've been through the problems. I made the same money I did when we did 1 million than I did when we were doing 10 million in sales. So with 10 times a headache. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to do that again. That's my only advice for you. So grow the business slow and smart. And that's just the way it was his temperament, man. He's still like this to this day.
That's super cool. So a couple of things that I want to dive into is kind of like the growth part of this, Steve, before we get into the exit. Because, first of all, there's a couple parts of the growth, and we can take this whatever way you want, is that I'm interested. I want to make sure we pull out is, one is like on the different companies and stuff like that. So the fact that you guys never had any arguments is fantastic. It sounds like both of your guys' temperament and integrity is there. But I think even for the best people in the world, it becomes a challenge if they don't set up their operating agreements correctly. Or like, I don't know if you had maybe kind of just run over the structure of did you guys both own 50-50 of the leasing company and your repair business? And the reason I asked before you give an answer to this is what happens is growth happens. And then there's all of a sudden like this fight of okay, who's doing what, who's bringing what value, who owns what, and then it becomes confusing, especially then if you throw in real estate and there's all these valuable assets that become apparent, and then there's just no communication of how all the different roles and responsibilities work. And inside of that kind of observation or question is the leasing part, and we can maybe take this after you answer this, because that is really intriguing, because that was very much like our old business, which becomes very valuable as an asset compared to just a transactional company because of how you're structuring the business with the customers. So maybe just kind of give the setup first. Does that question make sense?
No, it totally sense. And I'm smiling because it seems like we've walked down the same paths, and I think a lot of people do, but more so you and I. And so he looked at me day one when he told me I'm going to run Skaff, and so we own Skaff 50-50 to both of us.
Yep.
He went out because, let's face it, at 26 years old, I didn't have a pot to pee in. So we basically, I gave him every ounce of money I had to buy my shares. And so what happened over those years was he took, in order for me to buy my 50% of the business, we just took to pay money out of my check every single week. It took me 12 and a half years.
Yep.
And so that's how I literally purchased my half of the business. But he had the investment money to do that. So he financed cryolease himself out of his pocket to start growing, and before we went to the banks. And he also, when we moved in 2003, he also bought the land, built the building out of his own pocket. So, we went to the bank for a loan, but he signed for it. I did not. So I own 50% of the repair business, which was the biggest portion of our company. I mean, it was, brought in most of the sales, but he financed the rest of it. So it was very simple. Steve, you have 50% of ownership with me right from day one. And I'm doing these two things, and are you okay with that? I'm like, yeah, because Ryan is 26 years old. We all know nothing, right? We all know everything, but we really know nothing.
Yep.
And so I thought a leasing business was stupid. So it ended up being such an amazing business.
Oh, I know.
And it was, and I looked at him like, I don't want to deal with leasing tanks. But the cool part is, it ended up being a sister company and one of our biggest customers, because I would charge him like I would an air gas or a large gas company. I'd give him those kind of discounts. But he would, in the beginning, we would do everything through Skaff, and it ended up being too tough because we'd go out and buy a tank, we'd rehab it, make it brand new again, and then we'd have to wait 5 years to get our money back on that for rate of return, because we do small lease payments. But then we separated, then it's like, okay, you go get and wait forever to get your money back. I'm going to rehab that tank for you, and I'm going to bill you right away. I want my money right away. So that's how we actually operated. It was actually the best joke, and we still to this day laugh about it. He'd come in my office, he goes, "What the hell is this bill for?" And I would actually charge him like he was a customer, because he was, and we had to keep the business separate to order to make it work.
Well, and
so it was a blast.
I want to put an exclamation point on that, is keeping it separate and keeping it the right way, because I see too many people put everything into a blender between all the stuff we talked about, from the building, the land, the different operating companies, roles, responsibilities, ownership, and multiple companies. I see it every single day, which is where most conflicts arise from. So, before
he was burnt in the past with other businesses, so he knew that was just that knowledge he came with. I mean, he was really burnt by two partners, exactly. He was burnt real bad by two other partners in real estate. So they both left the table and held him, let him hold the bag. And so he knew how to structure it. And I, of course, the trust level for my dad in the respect, not just because he's my father, just because type of guy he was, I didn't even question it, and I didn't care.
Right.
And so, we kept 3 businesses separate. The business, the land and the building was called Prefontaine Properties. The cryo lease business was the leasing company, and Skaff Cryogenics was the actual repair shop. And the funny part is, cryo lease and Skaff, we paid rent to Prefontaine Properties every single month for the building and the space. It was hilarious how we had it set up, but it was the right way to do it.
Right.
To answer your point and get back to that, we kept everything completely separate, and it was the smartest thing to do.
Well, and I totally agree with you. And that's where I see so many conflicts arise from that. So if anybody's taking anything away from that, it's like, even if you are benefiting, different owner, I mean, if you give you the same owner of all this stuff, but you're like, first of all, it makes it clean for if anything comes down the road, which I'm assuming we'll get to, but even the confusion that happens with partners, I mean, it just becomes ugly, and I see it literally every day. So going back to the leasing. So like, I want to go back and like maybe kind of, if you can give, the listener just an overall rundown, like I'm curious on the overall business model. I think I've got a fairly good understanding, but you've got the manufacturer, you're the wholesaler, the distributor, repair and leasing. Kind of just walk us through the whole business model and the supply chain, because I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. Well, let's keep it simple first. So when we just owned Skaff and the cryo lease business wasn't started, we just had the Skaff business. So we would go out, say it was Scott and Steve Cryogenics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Bob and Steve Cryogenics. And we just went out, we bought a tank for $5,000. We spent $12,000 to rehab it. And so you're into it. Now you got to make a profit on that, right?
Yep.
So we have to figure in that to a lease payment to a customer. So then we got to sit there and wait 3.5 to 5 years to get our money back. And it's like, for a company that's just starting out and cash poor, it's like, okay, this is just stupid. So we learned after about a year that we just can't do it. And that's my father. My father had the idea to do the leasing company anyway. That was his thing. He just knew how to do it because in his old business, they leased out cylinders to customers. And that's what the distributor business does. And so he's like, we can do this with bulk tanks. So then he separated it and then got loans with the banks. Very, very simple loans. And of course, the banks had no clue what a cryogenic tank was and no clue what a lease program was. And so I said, Dad, this is what we got to do. We got to set it up kind of like a car lease is set up. And so with my background with the car business, we kind of set it up the same way, and we did the same methodology with that. So bottom line is, he then now CryoLease would go out and buy a tank for that $5,000. I'm just using round numbers. Rehab it for 15. So now he's into it for $20,000. He wants to make 50% on it. And so then he'd have me rehab it. So all I cared about was rehabbing that tank for him and charging him the $15,000. I made my 35%.
Yeah.
Now he takes that money, borrows that money from the bank, and then sends it out to a customer for 5 to 7 years with an automatic renewal.
Who owned the paperwork?
So in 3.5 to 5, Skaff did. CryoLease did, the leasing company.
Okay.
So the actual paperwork, the bank did until that loan's paid.
Well, no, I actually let's just for clarification, because the reason, the context behind my question is, so the leasing company billed the client, right? So that what was different from our business.
Oh, yes. We had nothing to do with it. Yeah. The repair business was done.
Here's what's interesting with this, though, is like for a copier business. So we would sell the copiers as a distributor, and we actually white labeled leasing. So we had leasing programs with 5 different banks. And so we would actually white label it. So we owned all the paperwork with our clients. So we had $13 million worth of like contracts or something like that. So like it was our customer, and then the bank was then white labeled, and then they would actually send the invoices out to the client and then actually give us the pass through. So like they had this.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Yeah. So that's just that was kind of the purpose behind my question.
Totally different. So basically the leasing company, the minute I was done that rehab and that tank was perfect, I would bill CryoLease for it, get paid for that right away. Mm-hmm. You think I was strict on other customers? I was so strict with him. I'd walk in and go, "Hey, you're 32 days, pay up." So that was the fun part. That was the great part about the business. We just busted each other's chops constantly. And then he'd go out. Now the cool thing about these tanks and the way it works, and especially the trailers now. I mean, a leasing company does 85, 90 grand, 110 grand a month now, and it's just cash rolling through the door. And so the way we would set it up is the contracts are set up as automatic leases. So these small companies, they don't want to come up with the 30, 40 grand it costs to buy a tank. They would rather pay the $275 a month.
Right.
We have tanks out there that he put out in 1998 that are still in the field collecting that monthly lease payment.
So okay,
I am not joking.
All right. Well, now we're gonna get a little technical on the listeners here, but like, so was it dollar out or fair market value, and like, how are you able to keep a lease out there, or is it a rental program, or like?
It's a leasing rental program with at the end of say they call up and say, we want a 5-year lease. It automatically renews unless they send the tank back. And so they just keep paying on it and paying on it and paying on it. So you think, I mean, do the math, 200, 300, $300, the customer could have bought that tank 10 times over.
I was going to say, they've
out of sight, out of mind for them. It's just awesome. It really was. And it's not, and we maintain it, you know, and there's no guesswork for them. They just pay the $300 and, you know, they'll make a killing on the liquid that sits in that tank. So they don't care. And it's out of sight, out of mind. There's probably, you know, 15 of them still out there like that, you know, that are 20 plus years old. It's absolutely amazing. And so you pay $300 a month and you do that times 20 something, you just go 20 years and there's your value of your tank that originally cost $20,000.
Oh, that's amazing. It goes back to like the stories I used to hear about the copier industry, which by the way is why no one trusts a copier sales rep. Is that like I actually had one of my
It's so true too, dude. Very true.
Yeah, you came from the car business. I came from the copier business. No one trusted anybody that's listening to this.
Neither business whatsoever.
Oh God. Like my dad, like this is back before the internet and before they were like really like the buyers understood financing. And so they go out there and they would fund, because again, the company business or the family business would, you know, bundle all this stuff in. So you'd bundle in maintenance and all this shit. And the next thing you know, it's going to be, you know, $1,000 a month. And it would be on a fair market value or even $1 out. So the end of the lease would come out and they would literally own it, but then it just renews. And my dad would go out there and be like, well, we're going to put a scanner on it now. And then you're going to re-sign for another 4 years. So we would actually get funding up front and we get a check for like another 50 grand.
Yeah. Now you know why no one wanted to talk to you. These tanks don't go bad though. That's the funny part. There's nothing wrong with them. Like there's no maintenance to them whatsoever. Very, 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 like 20 years, you might go over there once. And so there's really no maintenance to them. And usually the gas companies that are filling the tank took care of them. They're the ones that watched them because they're the ones filling it. And so it was amazing. So say you turn Ryan Cryogenics, you turn the tank in, right? Mm-hmm. And so that tank comes back and now it's in stock. And then the repair business would turn around and rehab it again and get it ready for the next lease customer for another 5 to 7 years or whatever the case may be. But there's no maintenance to the stuff. And it just sits out there because it's a tank. It's a thermos bottle. That's all these things are. Right. A thermos bottle. It's just like the one you put your coffee in, you know, you can put your coffee in, but it doesn't get hot to the touch. It's because there's insulation in there. So it's the same thing. It's just cold. That's all. So then, it was just amazing. The leasing business was fantastic.
So then, when you let's talk about the growth path then. So like as you're growing this, now that I understand that the back end structure of how you guys had everything set up, like what were some like milestones that you can disclose with us as far as like employees, growth size, and like over the course of the 24 years, and like what were some of the big wins and challenges?
Well, the challenge, you know, at the very beginning was the size of the building we were in, and it was decrepit and beat up. It didn't have heat, and it was in New Hampshire. Go figure. And so every single day, this is no joke. Every night we'd go home in the winters, and we'd have electric heaters in all the office. There was a heater in the shop, but that was it. But it didn't go to the office part. So we'd have electric heaters and 4 of them going. So we'd joke every night.
The red coils, the red coils that could start.
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, we're talking late 90s. So. You know, we'd leave every night, and I'd look at Bob, and I'd go, "Well, it'd be great if this place is still here in the morning." And we'd laugh about it coming down the stairs. You got insurance, hopefully. Yeah. Oh yeah. So that was our biggest challenge. I mean, you can't run a respectable business and do the high-end repairs in stainless steel welding and everything that we're doing in a building that this was. So once we got the business built up a little bit, is in '99, we said, okay, we got to start looking for land. So we did. We found a property, 20 acres, and that needed to be developed. About 3 towns over, about half an hour away. And we found it and we built, and by the time we moved in, it was October of '03. That was the biggest challenge. And, you know, it was embarrassing when you have a building that you really didn't want a customer to come up to see. And in this business, there's customers are visiting all the time. So that was one of the biggest hurdles. And then, of course, with that comes bigger, more business, more employees, and that thing. So, you know, that growth, I think that was the biggest challenge we faced at first, was that growth spurt that comes naturally when you grow, when you have to build a new building and, you know, you get more customers. We kept it simple, Ryan. We didn't overthink the business at all, which, you know, is something Bob taught me as a young adult. And we just kept it simple the entire way. And I didn't look to, I guess one of your questions we're probably going to get to is, you know, how did you intend to sell it? Yes and no. Okay. I think, because if you want to go there now, I'd love to. And my biggest thing was let's build a business and let's focus on the most important thing to me in any business, should be for anybody. Sales, you can have if you have a good product, you can have anybody sell it. After the sale, what's the most important thing to keep customers coming back is customer service. And to me, we treated our customers like their family. And still have relationships to this day, even though I'm winding down my career, that I formed when I was 25, when I first got into the business. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you look at that, and so my biggest focus was keep this business honest, keep this business clean, and treat customers as if they were family. And that's how that focus kept. And we still did the same thing every day up until the day we sold 24 and a half years later. So, you know, and with that, we all went through that 08, 09 period where, you know, that was difficult. For the first time in my career, I had to let 4 people lay them off. And that to me was crushing, because you get this relationship with your employees and how close we treated them and how much like family we treated them, and watch their kids grow up, and you have to lay kids off. And it's like, it was tough. So, you know, once we got to a point and we were growing big and we understood what the business was, then we started thinking, okay, is someone going to come knocking on our door one day? Because we are one of 4 in the country that do what we do.
Oh, no kidding.
And the oldest. The oldest was in Pennsylvania. They went out of business in 08, I think. And so here's Skaff up in the Northeast, this little family-owned business. That was the oldest in the country, because Skaff Cryogenics was started in 1978 by the original owner. So out of a barn in New Hampshire, a horse barn, actually. So, you know, we started understanding what we had and started then going, okay, what do we need to do to get the business to be saleable at, you know, in another 10 years or whatever it was, and it ended up being just about that. And so then we started thinking, okay, growth, crossing the country, you know, just because we're in New Hampshire doesn't mean we can't do business in Alaska. And sure enough, we ended up doing a huge business with Fairbanks Natural Gas on a bunch of LNG lease trailers that Bob did through the leasing company. Skaff repaired them, bought them, sold them to the leasing company, and he had trailers on lease out there from, early 2000s all the way up until 2017.
So I want to get into that. I want to get into that, Steve, but I want to just go back and clarify a couple of things, because I think it's interesting. So at this point, because you said it was 10 years by the time you sold, so that this would have been right around the financial crisis that you said, okay, someone's going to come knocking. Yep. So did your dad have I don't know what the size of the leasing company is versus Skaff and how that was working, but did your dad, because he had already gone through an exit, just look at things differently? And then explain maybe some of the big takeaways of that conversation that made you look at your business differently. And because our boot camps, we call them intentional growth, grow the value of your company with the end in mind, because it takes intentionality, and it took you 10 years, which I think is just amazing, because too many times, Steve, in a lot of the people that have been on this show, shit just happened to them. They got an out of the blue offer or something happened, and there's this whole, I wish I would have done things differently over the last 10 years. So maybe explain,
you're right.
What happened in those conversations, and then how did that impact your strategy going forward?
Well, it was funny you said that, because right around that time is when we did what we said we weren't going to do. In 07, when things were great, 06 and 07, we started growing and started hiring a ton of people instead of doing it the smart, slow way. And we were fat, and then 08 hit, and then I walk out in the shop and I could see from one end of the shop to another without one piece of equipment in the garage being worked on, and I just about fell on the ground and had a heart attack.
Oh my God.
But then we, not one thing. We had guys, we didn't want to lay anybody off. So the guys that have been with us forever, we had them painting walls, cleaning the shop. We just kept them busy all day so we wouldn't have to lay anybody off. So the 4 people we did lay off were the last 4 to come through the door. So, it was seniority basically. So we took care of all the long-termers that we had with us for 20 years. And then when we said, okay, this is what we have, this is where we're going, and we made it through that, and then we started to look at that strategy. And one of the biggest things that Bob said to me was, if we're going to do this, we got to think of it as drive down debt. Because in this business, it's capital intensive, right? I mean, you have to go out and buy huge cryogenic tanks, and you need money to do that. So, of course, we just went through our lines of credit with the bank.
Yep.
And so we had all this money sitting out there on both companies, really, on the leasing side and the Skaff side. And we had to figure out a way to drive that debt down in order to get there. So we spent, we probably started really pushing hard the 2012, because in 08, 09 was when all the crap happened. And then in 2012, people started knocking on our doors. And then we got a taste of what that was like. So we had some companies overseas from India, and they came to visit us first. And the way they wanted to buy us right away, and we said no. And so, because we weren't ready. And so we just kept that model of driving debt down, paying off debt, and becoming as debt-free as you could possibly come in our business, and get ready for that type of atmosphere. And so we ended up doing business with this company in India from 03 all the way up into 2012. And we imported their tanks to compete with the company that bought us. And so that was the cool part. And then, Chart actually came to us in 12 and looked at us as well. And it just wasn't the right time for both of us, both companies. And so we just kept doing what we were doing. And
okay, so
yeah, it was fun. And
I was gonna say, okay, so one thing is, I think you made a really good point that you're paying down debt. I mean, I can't tell you, Steve, how many people I've talked to, like, oh, if we sell, we have to pay down our debt. I'm like, yeah. So like,
well, if you want to get any money at the end, yeah.
and that's right. And so like, there's two different, like, it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I interviewed a guy years ago about, he runs a big private equity firm. He said there's only three ways private equity firms who buy companies to make money. One is they increase the EBITDA. Two is they increase the multiple. And three is they pay down debt. And like, so you just nailed down one, which is because, again, if you're paying down debt, just like in real estate, it means when you sell, you're going to put more in your pocket. But then there's the other ones of increasing the multiple and the EBITDA. So like, which is making the company more transferable. So I don't know if there was any strategies that you guys were doing, and did you have any kind of fuzzy articulation of like, hey, this is when and how we might sell, whether it was a financial buyer? Did you think it was probably going to be a strategic buyer? And then, like, was there anything operationally or strategically that, you mentioned the trailers that you did knowing that you would probably get more for the business at some point?
Yeah. I mean, to go back to your first question, our biggest thing was to keep a clean running debt-free business. It's almost impossible in our business, but we did the best we could. So we went, instead of having, we had a $4 million line of credit on both companies, and we only had $1 million on each by the time it was all said and done. So but it was up pretty high at one point. So we just sold and drove debt down as much as we could possibly do. And we ran a tight business. One of my things is one of the things I was doing when I was in the car business is I was doing small business consulting. So I'd go into small businesses and go, all right, this is what you're doing wrong. This is where you're spending the money wrong. And so I had some idea how to keep things real tight. And I ran the business like that for my entire career. And so we drove debt down as much as we could. We made every employee accountable in the whole business to understand costs, understand what we're doing. And so that strategy lasted quite a bit. So with the idea to look at EBITDA and to look at the multiple never even entered our mind until the day came. Honestly, really? I didn't care. Yeah, I didn't even care. And because if you haven't figured out yet, I got a bold personality, and Bob's the same way. So when it came time to understanding what that multiple was, we were just going to tell them what the multiple was, and negotiate from that point. So, I mean, I know that sounds really, really simple, but it really was that simple. So, and of course, it's like buying a car. That's pretty much what the process was. Go high, go low. It was actually enjoyable to me, but we didn't even think of anything else until then. So what we did in the meantime is we just put, especially the leasing company, Bob put originally 10 11,000 gallon trailers out in Alaska with Fairbanks Natural Gas, which is a huge gas company in Alaska. And they stayed out there forever. So that was just crazy income coming in. They paid the trailers off 10 years before we sold, and they kept paying them every single month.
So explain that. How that worked?
So basically, the leasing company would be just like leasing a tank. So we leased them 11,000 gallon portable trailers that they would haul LNG with. And so they would just pay those like we did anything else in the leasing company. They paid a monthly payment. They were like $2,000 a piece per month, times 10, do the math. But of course we had to pay because Bob did 10 trailers at once. We rehabbed them all at, 100 and something grand a pop. So, it was a good amount of debt to pay down, but, they kept them forever. They rolled a couple down a hill. So they owed us, they had to pay 100. And then one was caught in a barn fire. One guy brought it home and put it in his horse barn and caught a fire and blew up. So out in the middle of Alaska. So the 3 trailers at the end of the day, they had 7 of them left. And right before we sold, literally before we sold, they said, hey, we want to return all these trailers. Well, in the contract was they had to pay for shipping to get those back to New Hampshire from Alaska. And so it was cheap, and they were all beat up by that point. They had them 20 years. And it was cheaper for them to literally pay us out of the contracts than it was to ship those things back. So they paid us out of the contract on the 7 remaining trailers, and they just kept them for parts, and we never had to deal with them ever again. So and that was an amazing part of the business. So we got rid of all that crazy debt before we sold, and we literally ran the business with the idea of just keeping it clean, simple business every day with low debt.
So as you were marching towards, as you started getting knocks on the door, and it's very interesting the fact that your dad had been through this ringer before, because I think a lot of people I talked to, Steve, or I've interviewed, they had never been through it, and then they get those knocks and they're just going in blind. And so they don't know what's valuable, what's not valuable, what they should have been doing. And it's just totally they just get caught off guard of what the game is that they're playing. So did you guys start was there anything on the tax or legal side or either investment banker or any kind of advisors that you were, having conversations with that were helping you along the way? Or was it I can maybe get a gist from your guys' personalities that it's this is what we want and you go pound sand if we don't get it? What was the advice strategy?
Pound sand if you don't like it. And honestly, it was that simple. And I hate to say that, but it was that simple. I knew what we had. Bob knew what we had. We ran a damn good business. It was simple, clean, honest company that we had, and we just kept it our books were so simple, it was crazy. There was not much to it. We separated all 3 businesses, and basically we were a repair shop. A tank came in, we repaired it, goes out, you bill for it. And we had maybe 12, 15 invoices, tops 20 per month. That's it. But each one of our invoices was 15 to 40 grand. You know what I mean? So, you do the math, and, then a leasing company, we had a ton of work with every single month, but those are just for the stuff that you lease out every month. So the actual month-to-month running of the business was simple could get, but our numbers were there. At the end of the day, right before our big year, I think right before we sold, we did Skaff did $6.3 million in sales. That's without the leasing business. So, that part of it, we just knew what we had. And we also knew that we have won. Our major competitor was in Ohio. He's still in business. Great guy. We had a very healthy relationship with him, but we knew what we had because there was only a couple of us in the country that had a reputation of excellence. We were one of them. We pretty much set the standard in the business on how to do that. A lot of people copied Skaff, their model. One of our competitors started doing leasing as well. They still do to this day. So there's a way to go about it. And we just knew what we had. And I didn't listen to anyone else, what they said. I just kept focused on what we had.
Which is awesome. So then, which makes it, like you said, more simple, a lot more simple. when you're going towards this and you have these conversations, because, right now there's a lot of, I don't know how familiar you are with private equity, but there's a lot of financial buyers that are out roaming the marketplace. And so
oh, hell yeah.
You have, the strategic competitors or, buyers like Chart and the companies that were probably knocking on the door because it makes so much of a logical, competitive sense. So as you're going through this, if you're not looking at multiple and looking at EBITDA, how did you value the business? And then did you and your dad intend, I don't know if you guys sold the leasing with the repair business, but how were you planning on packaging up and how were you getting to the number that you guys wanted? Well,
we started thinking that towards the end, it was kind of this is a really weird how it happened. In 12, we had 2 or 3 businesses looking at us, Chart being one of them. We said no, it wasn't the right time. Our debt was still a little bit up there. So we said no. And to the end of 12, beginning of 13, we started going, okay, we really got to start thinking of a multiple here. So then it started coming into it. What do we think this business is worth? And then all of a sudden, the biggest competitor to Chart over in Italy knocked on our door. So here we are. This is hilarious because here we are trying to drive a business basically down debt free as much as possible. And here comes another company just like Chart that makes tanks, but over in Italy. And they said, we want to come into the States and we want you to be that company to import our tanks. And I looked at Bob, I'm like, here we go. We're going to buy stuff again. There goes our credit line. and sure enough, we did. And that was in 13. We started doing it in 13, 14, 15, and 16. We imported new tanks from Italy and from India. They had a manufacturing facility in both countries. And so we were importing tanks to compete only with Chart. And we did that on purpose. And we brought Italian business into the country that's never been here before, and it was fantastic. It was a ton of fun, but we were taking business from them. And here's this little teeny company in New Hampshire, yet this monster of a business in Italy is basically utilizing our services to bring tanks in. So we would bring them in just the bottle. We would pipe them and paint them here and sell them out of Skaff. And that all of a sudden drove our debt back up. And then here comes Chart, and then 4 other companies knocking in 17. End of 16, beginning of 17, all at the same time. I'm like, all right, we got to go through this process again. So let's sell every piece of new equipment that we have, or as much as we can. And we started driving down debt again. And it took us only a year and a half to drive down to where we were before. So it was pretty impressive, actually, because we just kept it simple and clean. So that we went through that process twice, and we didn't want to, but we did just because it just made us more valuable. And oddly enough, quick sidebar, they bought us, and they turned around and bought that company out of Italy 6 months later.
Oh, crazy. So when you say that,
yeah,
I'm going to dive more into that. But so when you say that you went through this process twice, what was the process? Like, were you and your dad having conversations with all these strategic buyers? Did you have any, legal or tax or investment bank, any kind of advice sit next to you? Or what was the actual conversation environment like?
Yeah. We did in 2012. We went with an advisor out of Maine, and we ended up saying we'll never do that again, because when we were trying to sell in 12 before this company out of Italy came to us, I think that was a part of the reason we didn't sell. But things happen for a reason. I truly believe that. So come the second time around, we said we would never go down that road again. I am not hiring an M&A firm. It's just not going to happen. We did everything ourselves with our own lawyer, with our own accountant, and we kept it stupid simple. And everyone was saying, you guys can't do that. And I, of course, bold attitude that I have, I'm like, why can't we? So our lawyer was our lawyer for a reason, and he came from M&A, and our accountant was our accountant for, my father has used the same firm since he was 20 something, and here he is almost 80 at that time. And so we just used our own internal accountant and our internal lawyer, and we did everything from there. We did not go back to the M&A structure and hiring a lawyer. We sat down with these people, hiring a firm. We sat down with these people face to face, myself and Bob did, when everyone else started banging on our doors. And there was 5 total major plays in the industry. And the one we ended up going with, of course, is the one I still work for now, and that's Chart. But there was reasons for that. But yeah, it was, I can't stress enough how we didn't get confused. We didn't keep it complicated. We kept it simple.
Well, what happened with the first round with the investment banker? What was the?
Well, he was not selling the business the way he should. He didn't understand it well enough. They were looking at it differently than Bob and I would. And we just got so frustrated with the way he was valuing the business and the way he was looking at it and how he was portraying that to the potential buyers. And then I'm sitting there going, okay, if he's doing this wrong, and if something happens and we do sell, I have to pay him this X amount of dollars, which is crazy exorbitant amount of money. I'm like, this guy's an idiot. No offense to him, but he was at that time.
No offense, but he was.
No offense, but he really was. And I'm like, he's a smart dude, but he wasn't right for us. And so I'm in my head, I looked at Bob and I can do this better than him. Why are we even hiring this guy? So he says, let's never do that again. And then of course, in 2013, we started that whole process over again and growing. So we said, if this ever happens again, we'll never do that again. We're going to do this ourselves. And that's why we never did it again. We look back at that process. We still talk about it to this day. And we would have got taken if we had let a company come in, an M&A company come in and do that for us, because they didn't understand what we were doing.
Well, it's interesting because, like, I mean, not to go down a major rabbit hole, but that was the similar experience that we had. Is they didn't understand how complicated our business was between the leasing, the different profit centers, the actual true intrinsic value of the business. And so, going back to the
boom, you just hit it on the nose. You just nailed it. They didn't understand all those the intricacies of that business, and same with us.
Yeah. So then, did you guys, like, as you guys are going down the second route? And by the way, I want to put a little big explanation point on the fact that you said your attorney was an M&A attorney. Because too many times, I mean, just like the fact you guys use your own advisors is fine, but you guys had people that were skilled in transactions, which too many times I see people, that's where things just absolutely become a disaster from deal structure perspective. So that kind of goes into as you got 5 different buyers that are knocking on your door, how did you navigate those conversations, and what to you, Steve, again, I want to know, was it the leasing and the repair at the same time? And then as you and your dad, you have 2 different people, 2 different age brackets, 2 different probably personal financial situations. What criteria were you putting on that was important to you from these 5 different ones? So in our kind of framework, we talk about there's, the money is important, how much you get up front versus over time, whether you have to be an employee to get it. And then also, like, what's going to happen to your people, to your legacy. There's a lot of stuff that you're going to have decisions that are made on. And how did what did you use as filters with all those decisions that you had to make?
It's an awesome question, Ryan. And here's the deal. I truly believe once we started the process and we were doing it ourselves, and I believe in face-to-face, I believe in brutal honesty, and I believe in just talking to people. I think you can cover anything if you don't put on the facade of I'm an M&A guy and I got to do this way. No, just sit down, shut up, and just talk to me. And that's basically what we did. So when I needed to be involved in every part of that, and it was funny because Bob kind of took an interesting backseat during negotiations and put his 2 cents in when needed be, but he kind of let me go through the whole process. And of course, his experience was immeasurable, and his advice was immeasurable. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest things we said is, okay, of course, money is important. There's no doubt. That's number 1, and what we're going to sell it for. 2 is, who do we pick the right person that gives my company, Skaff, the leasing company, the property came with it. That had to go with it. That wasn't an option. Who is going to take that, and then 10 years from now, I can know it's in good hands, and I'll look back and go, wow, they messed my whole business up that I spent my whole life. I didn't have kids because that was my child. And, and all this stuff was important. And then one of the most important things to me, and I've always told my team this, if it wasn't for our employees, we would not have had a company. And so I needed, and this was non-negotiable, I needed to know that my employees were safe, and that they weren't going to come in. And I remember getting emotional I'm about as real as you get. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And I remember pointing at the president at the time of Chart and said, you look at me in the eye and you promise me that this is not your, intention to come in here and just, desecrate the business and get rid of everybody. And he's like, Steve, the reputation that you guys have is important. Your skill, your expertise with your guys in the shop is important. We are holding on to this because we want a strategic location. So it was important to me to understand that our employees were safe. And if they weren't, I would not have done it just for my own gain, because face it, I could have kept going for another 15, 20 years and it would have been fine and making great money and, having no debt and I never paid a car payment until we sold the business. I can't believe it. I paid for my own gas for the first time in 2018. I remember being at the gas pump and saying, I called my father and I go, I just had to pay my own gas. This sucks. All
right, so I got a good comment for you, Steve. I did a presentation in front of 9 entrepreneurs that all have pretty sizable companies, and I was going through my our 5 principles, and one of them is the financial targets and understand the valuations, all this stuff. And this guy raises his hand. He goes, "Ryan, I got to tell you one thing. Not one owner in this room has any idea how much tires cost." Because
not at all.
So
it's so great. So, nothing, car payments and, anything that's for the house and you name it. We just didn't pay anything. So it was a rude awakening when that happened, which was it was a fun joke. It wasn't a bad thing. But so basically bottom line is when we started looking at these businesses, those are really, really, really important things to us. And then you have to nail down, okay, who do we have looking at us? What's their, we came to a point, Ryan, we had 4 offers all at once. So, there was 3 of them that were just absurd. and actually 5 total offers out of 6 companies. 3 of them were just absurd that I literally laughed at them on the phone, told them I loved them, and just get a clue. And I said, let's go our separate ways. I appreciate you guys looking at our business, but there's not a chance. And I literally said those almost exact words. And then they came down to chart, and they had the most synergies, and they had the most opportunity for success to keep my and Bob's legacy to keep going and to keep these employees employed. And that was huge. And it was a major decision maker for us.
21. So then, I'm curious. I don't know, because it's a public company, if all this stuff is disclosed or not. Because I don't usually get into the numbers, but every once in a while when I interview someone that's sold to a public company, they're disclosed. But the nature of the deal, right? Because I think the things that you said are important to you, Steve. I think are important to a lot of original founders, of their employees, their legacy, their baby. I mean, this is all ties really well into what we do for a living, and then trying to weigh those and quantify those against the numbers, right? Because I have a friend that's 25 offers, and each one of those offers are different from a dollar amount, and then different for what the buyer's gonna do with the business. And you have to weigh okay, well, how much do I actually care about my employees from a dollar figure for my own pocketbook, right? And so how are you when you had those conversations, you said, okay, chart is the person here and is the buyer. Is there anything that you did in the overall deal structure, from how much was it cash up front? Did you have to take any notes? Did you have to did you get any equity swap? And how did all that structure get in line based on and how did you reassure that your employees were going to be taken care of instead of just, a handshake?
Well, the employee thing was understanding that what they wanted to do. I'll start there and then work backwards. The employee thing, what they wanted to do with our business and why they were buying it, I was confident that they were not going to just, come in, close the shop down just to get rid of a competitor. And they needed it because the landscape of our business was changing right in front of our eyes. People were buying each other out. The major companies, our customers, our mutual customers, were buying each other out. And the landscape was changing. So they needed us, if you look at the country as a whole and break it into, 4 quadrants. In the Northeast, we had everything locked up. In fact, we did business from the Northeast all the way to Alaska, down to Texas and down to Florida. We did business, and we're only ones of that size that did business in the whole country because of the leasing piece of it. Mm-hmm. I knew that they wanted it for strategic reasons. So once that was established, we sat down with the employees and the key employees, because they were my family. And again, heart on the sleeve, I just said, guys, this is what we're doing. In order to take this business to the next level, Bob and I would have to re-energize the business, and I would take probably another $5 million to grow and get another location. And we just, honestly, I didn't have it in me to do this again. Mm-hmm. And because, for all the ups and downs that we were going through, it was tough. And, my father was getting to the age, he was 78 at the time we were starting to look at all this, 77. And he didn't want to do it. He's like, hey, if you want to do it, go for it. But he says, I'm not going to do it. I said, oh, I agree. And I think the landscape is changing enough in the business that I don't want to be in the business anymore of owning it. I'll be glad to be in it, but I don't want to own it because of the unknowns. Business owners sit there and stare at the ceiling every night instead of sleeping, is what most nights over 25 years were like. So wondering where the next payday is coming from, and how you're going to make payroll that week, and the whole bit, all the stress that comes with it. So that being said, we then told the key employees of what we're doing, and they were fine with it. They were so incredibly supportive. And the question out of probably, once we sat the whole team down, one of the guys who's been there forever since he was literally a kid looked at me and goes, Steve, are you staying? They said, yes. He goes, I'm fine. Wow, and we couldn't believe the amount of trust that all these employees, every down to the kid that we last hired, when he's been there maybe a month, all the way to the guy who's been there 25 years, that they all were like, whatever you guys want to do, we're in. And that's the type of atmosphere and the family we had there. And that's amazing. You don't find that many places. And I'll still walk over, I'm now, the VP of my division, the repairs division. So I manage 6 different businesses, and that was one of them. And so I still walk into this day and get huge hugs from all the employees that I haven't seen in a while, all the shop guys. And so, it was a storybook type of ending, to be honest with you. Did
your dad sell the leasing part? Was that all part of the package?
Yes, it had to be. He kicks himself. He says to this day, we were just talking about a dinner the other night, actually on Saturday night. To this day, there's a piece of him in which he kept the leasing piece of it, because a publicly held company is going to run it a little bit differently than 2 guys. right? I mean, they have to worry about a lot of different things that the two private owner does not have to worry about, especially on the leasing business.
So, a little bit more freedom
you know, I should have kept it.
Well,
a little bit more freedom on that end of it. But no, I think at the end of the day, there's no regrets on.
And they bought the buildings and land
that
too.
Was a part of it. They did. They had to. That was part of the deal. One of the companies that were looking at us that just wanted the repair business. We said no. Another one, the other ones just didn't value us high enough. And so at the end of the day, we did get an offer from Chart, and we said no because we were too far apart. And I'll never forget this. July of 2017, I called up the president and on a Sunday night at his house on his cell phone and said, "Dude, listen." And this is the president doing negotiations of the business with the CFO, which is now our CEO. Yeah. She's a dynamo. Her name is Jill. She's amazing. But I called him up at his house. And I go, "Dude, it's supposed to be this really, you know, corporate meetings and all serious, formal." And I call him up. I go, "Dude, I'm so pissed at you right now." He goes, "What are you talking about?" It's like 8:00 at night, and he actually answered the phone. He goes, "Steve?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "If two guys in New Hampshire are willing to move $1.5 million, you big monster of a company can move $1.5 million. Get your shit together. Let's meet halfway. Fly up here on Tuesday. Let's have dinner." He came up on Tuesday. We did it over dinner that night, and everything else just kind of transformed from there, and the due diligence started in the whole bit. But yeah, it was that simple. I was so pissed. And my wife goes, "You're actually calling?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't care. I don't give a freaking ass who he is. Let's just call him." Well, so I call him, and to this day, he's not with the company anymore, but to this day, I still talk to him. He's an absolute love. He's a sweetheart of a guy.
And I think, one of the big takeaways too is this: you could walk away. You know what I mean? Like, you had the ability to walk away, which gives you the confidence.
Oh my God. Yeah. We weren't settling. There was just no way we were settling. We were kind of low as debt. We get about as close to debt free as we could get. We had a kick-ass business with a company that really wanted to explode with us in Italy. So yeah, there was no walking away, but once we were almost, we were 3 million apart basically. And we each had to move a little bit. And so that was their phone call at 8:00 on a Sunday night. "Dude, you have to, if we can move, two small guys, you guys can move. Let's get our shit together." I said, I think I might have said, "Pull your head out of your ass." And he burst out laughing. And he came up two days later. We literally put a deal together over wine at a bar in New Hampshire. It was fantastic.
That's awesome.
So then, of course, all the legal stuff came in, and all the due diligence period. And then it got serious, and I almost said no like 3 times during that process. But no, it was an amazing way to do it. And if I had to do it again, I would do it myself again in a minute, just because of the way it went.
That's awesome. And and I know for the lack of time, we're not going to get into the major due diligence part, but the 2 big questions that I have, 3, and then we can wrap up. One is, and you can take them whatever order you want, is one is that because your dad had the building, the land, and the leasing company, I don't know how was it just, I'm just honestly curious, Steve, from the son's perspective, because that's where I was, where I don't know if your dad's portfolio at that time was worth more than what you had and how that all worked. And obviously it sounds like you guys had pretty open conversations. Did it all just say, "Hey, this is what it was"? And I'm just curious about that whole dynamic.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was it. It was he owned so basically when the deal was structured, we had values on each business, of course, right?
Yep.
So each business was valued. So I knew what I was getting out of the Skaff sale, the repair side sale, and he knew what he was getting out of the other 2, which I had no part of, and I did not care. Because that's how we set it up 25 years ago. That's so important. That's that level of trust that was there. And it was not even, I never even questioned it once in my life, not even through that whole process, never even thought twice about it. And come final day, those numbers were identical and everything was exactly how we set it up to be. It was never an argument.
Well, I mean, and clarity brings confidence and good. I mean, it's just, that's awesome. I give you out a lot of props, because a lot of people, I've heard where all of a sudden there's this whole, it's a lot of this relies on me. And then that whole, that voice comes into the head and just destroys relationships and deals. And why did you?
Oh, absolutely.
Why did you say that you almost killed the deal twice in due diligence? Was there, especially selling to a public company with the silent period and all that stuff, what was was there any kind of epiphanies or major takeaways that you want to give for the listeners on that?
Well, yeah, the due diligence process it will be the most, especially if it's your baby, and it's not an investment thing. They actually grew the business for a reason, and like we did. And so when you look at the due diligence process, they literally, I don't know how else to explain it, but to be brutally honest, they literally will climb up your butt with a fine tooth comb and look at everything.
I call it cavity search, man. And bend down.
Yep. Totally cavity search and brutal honesty. And of course, I have a mouth on me, and I've actually can't believe I haven't dropped an F-bomb during this whole interview. But I did during that process. These guys would come in and sit in front of me and say such stupid shit that I would literally look at, get out of my office. This is get out before I kill you. And that's how it went. I mean, that's how honest I am with these guys. And so they just look at everything, and they weren't looking at it the right way. So we'd have conversations about that. I'd call the president up and go, please get these people out of my house. He goes, Steve, just breathe and go through the process. But not only that, the due diligence process was hard from the standpoint that you have to still run your business in case it didn't happen.
Yep.
And so you're busy, crazy busy all day long, and trying to run a respectable business and keep everything on the up and up and actually doing business as normal. Yet your days were just obliterated by getting these people the information that they wanted. And so, the gal that is still working for that business up there in New Hampshire, my old company, our internal accounting woman, she had many breakdowns during the process. And between three of us, I mean, she was my right arm, basically. So between myself, her, and Bob, we would be like, what? This is a nightmare. And the due diligence process, it worked out to be okay, but it was an absolute nightmare, the amount of information. But we had our shit together. So the amount of information they were asking, we had everything literally ready at the ready for them. But then came the stupid questions, and why'd you do it this way? And it's just like, oh my God, get out. Well, that was a very trying period.
Well, and what I find it crazy interesting that it needs to be a huge takeaway from anybody is you guys had everything. You said it more of the times than anything is you ran a tight ship, and you had everything clean, and you had everything ready, and it was still a nightmare. So that's
exactly. It was a nightmare. So that's the reality. So if you go into it, a potential entrepreneur goes into selling their business, and especially to a public company like Chart, if you go into it without the knowledge and you think it's going to be an easy process during the due diligence, everything else to me was fun, easy, negotiating back and forth, walking away from the table because we didn't have to. That's all was okay. That's just the art of the deal, right? That's just talking to people and doing business. But it's the due diligence process that has no rhyme or reason to it, and the stupid stuff they ask for is just
why'd you code this expense this way back in 2002? What?
Well, I'll never forget this conversation. One of the guys was up and he was sitting in front of me. He was a finance guy, and he asked a question. I said, you know what? I won't say his name, but I said, you know what? You need to take a break, and it's almost lunch, so why don't you go to lunch? He says, why do we have to stop now? I said, because I'm going to punch you. And I was totally serious. I said, I am literally going to punch you in your face. Get out of my office. Go to lunch. Let me breathe for another hour. Come back, and we'll start all over. He looked at me like, okay. He literally got up and walked out, and he came back. Everything was fine. But it gets tense because, it's your baby, right? I mean, You had it in your interview question. It is your baby. But it's still going to be an impossibly hard avenue to go down. But we ran a tight business, and by doing that, we never touched on this, but what that included was running a tight business is making every one of your employees, all the way down to the guy who sweeps the floor in the shop, accountable for every one of their actions and involving them in the business. And I did that with all my guys. And that was one of the things I learned from Chrysler, actually, is making your people accountable. And that was huge. That was a massive piece of it. So come time to due diligence, we had every answer possible, and it was still a nightmare. So to answer your question,
it's so true. And so the kind of, as we're wrapping up here, Steve, what has it been like being an employee? And then what is it like after the close, and what's it like?
All right, I'll start with the after the close. The day we never touched on the way the deal was structured, but basically it was all cash deal up front, with a holdback for due diligence and for insurance reasons, in case anything happened. Blah blah blah. It was not that much. It was, I think, $750,000 out of it's the total sale of the business. So it was tiny, with 3 specific paybacks, and the last one was just this last January. So it was very small. But that sigh of relief of not having that stress of being an entrepreneur right away was immeasurable. I remember the night it closed and the night the money hit the bank. I have never slept so well in my life. And a lot of my stress, and a lot of entrepreneurs will probably say the same thing. A lot of my stress came from looking at a business not just for myself, but I looked at the business, and I've always conducted myself this way, is every single decision that I make, it affects my employees and their families and their children and everything they do. So, and that was my stress. I wanted to make sure I was getting up every morning and making the right decision, not only for me and my family, but for all my employees, because it affected so many people. You got 21 employees, and multiply by that by the family size they have. So that was a massive amount of stress every day for me, making sure we had the right insurance and all that stuff and blah, blah, blah. So that night I looked at the ceiling, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to stare at the ceiling tonight and think about what I'm going to do tomorrow. I just went to sleep. And it was an amazing experience. But I woke up the next day. My wife was laughing at me, still laughs at me to this day. I woke up the next day still pretending it's my business, and I still do now. So I still act that way. I still make decisions that way. And I'm actually training and mentoring the employees that are running these facilities like I used to think like that, because often employees for big companies don't think it's their back pocket. They don't think it's their dime. So they'll spend money willy-nilly and not even worry about it. And you can't do that. So, I'm in the middle of teaching all these people how to run a business, a small family-owned business, the right way, even though you're a publicly owned company. So it's a challenge. Cool. It's fun, but yeah, it's very cool. And it's, they look at me like, the dog that turns the head when they're really confused. That's the look I get 9 times out of 10. But after a full 2 years, they're getting it.
Have you ever heard of the book called The Great Game of Business?
No.
It's you would really like it. So it's based. The author is Jack Stack, and he's the father of open book management. And it's called The Great Game of Business. And you would totally geek out on that. It's all about getting everybody.
I'm just writing it down already. So
he actually
buy it immediately.
Honestly, Steve, he has actually where they call it weekly huddles, and it's all about the business and it's all about the finances. He has a person's picture right next to every single line in the P&L. And so, that's a massively important. It's awesome that you said that, because,
every guy in the shop had their own portion of the budget on a monthly budget, and they got so used to owning that and so used to being a part of the business. We'd have, monthly meetings and tell them exactly where we financially, what happened, who affected what. And, it builds such a team atmosphere to have that accountability down to the smallest level of the business, that to me, it's the only way to run a business. And even though we're publicly traded now, Chart, I literally run all 6 facilities like that and make every person accountable. And they love it. You know why? It gives them an extra bounce in their step. It gives them an extra reason to come to work every day, instead of just looking at it and going, wow, I'm just an employee. They don't care what I think. You can't do that.
So I got a question.
Unfortunately, corporate America is like that.
I was just going to say, so given your personality, I think we could relate a little bit, is like, you fit in there, because not every corporate America or public company wants entrepreneur spirit running around and saying what they can say, because they've cashed a check and they don't really have to be there. So is it just that's kind of the culture it is, or is there? I'm just curious on the dynamics there.
Actually, the culture changed when the previous management was all dispersed. The current CEO has that really open type of outlook on things, and quite honestly, they allow me to do me. And if they didn't, I wouldn't be here. And, it's one of those things where I don't worry about what people are going to say, and don't worry about how management looks at what I'm doing, because I honestly, in my heart, I know it's the right way to run a business. And, if I guess at the end of the day, Ryan, I look at these managers that run the 6 facilities for me, and I'm like, if I can just teach them, and until the day I ride off in the sunset, if I can just teach them 5 things over the next 2 years, as I said this myself, 2 years ago when we sold, if I can just teach them 5 things each that will take them and allow them to run and improve their business careers, then I'm a happy camper. They're all not going to get it. You have to weed through the problem children. But if I can just teach them something that they understand how to run a small business, they'll take that with them forever, because the methodology to run a small business can be used in corporate America and tiny business. It's all the same to me. And I just do me. Sometimes I get, spanked for doing me, but I just do me, and I just run with it. And
but you can be comfortable with it, because being you is easy.
I know I'm doing the business the right way, and so I'm not doing it. And put it this way: I guess this is the best way for an entrepreneur working for someone to think about it. I am not making any decisions that I would not make if I was still the owner. And I think that's the key. I think that's the secret sauce, because, you know, too often employees get stuck in these ruts and they think they're not part of the puzzle, which they actually are. So if you make decisions like it's your dollar and it affects your wallet, you know, that's the key.
I agree with you if the culture is the right way and that allows people to do that, right? I mean, there are very big dictatorial cultures out there where you actually don't have any say. So I think what's interesting is that you aligned and you found a place out of the 5 buyers that allowed this to happen, because, you know, a different buyer could have, you know, been completely different, which, you know, doesn't allow you to be you. And it just, I see it, you know, both ends of the spectrum, and it's super awesome that you're happy, because like there's stories out there.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. So, well, you know, I don't think we haven't had a challenges, because sometimes I get frustrated that they don't see exactly my way, but and I want to just friggin' blow a top. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I don't need to be here. I'm here because I want to be, and it's actually not so bad. But the day I tell my manager, the day that it ends not being cool, then you'll be the first to know, and I'll walk away and walk away knowing I did the right thing. So
then if we were to go back and, you know, say something to the Steve of your past, like 25 years ago, or another listener that is in that part of your journey, is there what would be one of your 1 or 2 big takeaways of like, hey, if you just think about this in this way, it'll really move the needle? You know, I came to that question in the basic outline that you sent, and I had a hard time with that one. I have notes on every one of your questions except for that one. And I look back and I wrote one note this morning, and I wrote absolutely nothing, because it literally, every mistake I made and every decision I made, good, bad, or indifferent, made me the owner I was the day we sold. So honestly, this is weird. I don't know if you've ever done this, but I'm the same guy I was at 10 years old and I am now. My same boisterous attitude, my same, ballsy outlook on things. I'm that person. And I have friends that I've known my entire life go, oh my God, you haven't changed one bit since we were in grammar school. And I really haven't. So, you know, and someone just told me that recently, and I burst out laughing because of this question you gave me. And the guy just said it to me 2 days. And so I absolutely nothing. And I say that sincerely because I've made a ton of mistakes over the years, but they all taught me how to be a better business owner. And if we can't grow from making stupid decisions, as we all do, then we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. So as long as it's not life-threatening and put everyone's jobs and business at risk, I think we're doing okay. But I wouldn't change a darn thing. I loved every minute of it. That's really awesome. If someone wants to reach out and wants to run an idea by you or just follow you, or what's the best mode of communication for you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it email? Is it, you know,
email is one. Email or my phone number. I am open to any entrepreneur out there to help, to guide, to even take advice myself. We're never too old to learn, but email and phone number, anybody could reach out to me that's listening to this. So I'd love to talk to people about business.
And then those are in the show notes. So Steve, this has been an absolute blast having you on the show, man. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it.
Well, Ryan, my pleasure too. It's been fun, and I didn't realize how much we had in common. And you and I could probably keep talking for another 5 hours, and you know, get an old fashioned bourbon at the end of the day. I was going to say we need to hit I really appreciate it.
We need to hit the stop record if we're going to do that. No.
Yeah, exactly. No, but my pleasure. I sincerely appreciate you reaching out, and like anything we've talked about today, if I help one person, then I'm a happy camper.